New documents obtained by CBS News show Attorney General Eric Holder was sent briefings on the controversial Fast and Furious operation as far back as July 2010. That directly contradicts his statement to Congress. Listen to what Holder told a Judiciary Committee hearing on May 3rd this year.
I'm not sure the exact date, but I probably heard about Fast and Furious for the first time over the last few weeks.
Yet internal Justice Department documents show that at least 10 months before that hearing, Holder began receiving frequent memos discussing Fast and Furious. They came from the head of the National Drug Intelligence Center and Assistant Attorney General Lanny Breuer. In Fast and Furious, ATF agents allegedly allowed thousands of weapons to cross the border and fall into the hands of Mexican drug cartels. It's called letting guns walk, and it remained secret to the public until Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was murdered last December. 2 guns from Fast and Furious were found at the scene, and ATF agent John Dodson blew the whistle on the operation. Ever since, the Justice Department has publicly tried to distance itself. But the new documents leave no doubt that high-level justice officials knew guns were being walked. 2 Justice Department officials mulled it over in an email exchange October 18, 2010. It's a tricky case given the number of guns that have walked, but is a significant set of prosecution, says Jason Weinstein, Deputy Assistant Attorney General of the Criminal Division. Deputy Chief of the National Gang Unit, James Trusty, replies, "I'm not sure how much grief we get for guns walking. It may be more like, finally, they're going after people who sent the guns down there."
And on your screen right now is Sharyl Attkisson of CBS News, investigative correspondent who has been following the so-called Fast and Furious story for quite a while now. And her reporting has gotten the attention of people at the White House, which we're going to talk about a little later on. At its heart, what was the intention of the people who might have been involved with this program on the U.S. side?
Well, let me be clear and say we don't know all the answers yet, and that has changed over the months. It's been really the subject of a lot of speculation. The stated intention that's come out at hearings and so on was the idea that if you let the guns go, you don't stop them and you don't even track them, that they'll show up in Mexico in the hands of certain drug cartels, and that will tell us something about the organization of cartels and eventually allow U.S. law enforcement to somehow take down a major cartel. That seems to be the stated purpose that we know of right now.
Now, the idea is not new because I've been reading and there's been testimony that in the Bush administration, similar programs were tried.
We found and reported very early on that we found one case dating back to 2006, and now we found more of them that were smaller scale but appeared to be similar idea, where instead of stopping guns or interdicting them sort of at the ground level, law enforcement was encouraging gun dealers to go ahead and sell to these questionable customers and let the guns go out onto the streets.
So the Attorney General has testified that his knowledge of this program was fairly recent. I'm wondering if you believe that's possible.
Well, I really don't want to say what I believe. I think it's better to say what we've reported and what I think the facts have shown so far. Initially, his testimony appeared to contradict documents that showed he was briefed or sent briefings more than a year before he said he'd heard of Fast and Furious. And initially, when we spoke to the Justice Department, they said something like he misunderstood the question. What he meant was he first heard of the controversy over the program recently. And yes, he probably knew of it a year ago, just not the controversial parts. But in his written statement that he gave to Congress last Friday, he wrote a letter explaining some of this. And he said, I didn't even hear of the generic program a year ago. I didn't read those briefing memos that had been sent to him almost weekly, starting at least in July of 2010 by the National Drug Intelligence Center. And also he'd been sent some information by Lanny Breuer, the head of his criminal division. He says, I didn't read those. Those things are culled and looked over by my deputies, and they decide what to tell him. So he maintains he knew nothing of the program. Critics say that seems unlikely. This was the biggest gun trafficking case in that area in the southwest border. It garnered a lot of attention, a lot of discussion among law enforcement in general. So they're saying that would be unlikely.
And what do Justice Department officials say about the program? Is it something that they are proud of, regret doing? What's the attitude?
They came out fairly strongly after the story first broke with a statement. Attorney General Eric Holder even issued a written statement to all the U.S. attorneys that prosecute these types of cases and basically said more or less, if this sort of thing is going on, it better stop because this is never something that we would approve. And in law enforcement, what I learned when I was researching the story earlier this year, That's a big no-no. I mean, not even thousands of guns, but one gun, law enforcement agents will tell you, should not be allowed on the street. And one of them even said, we're trained that if one gun is somehow misplaced in any sort of operation, nobody goes home till that's found because of the obvious implications. This gun can be used over and over in violent crimes when it's in the hands of criminals, so you just don't do that.
The Congressional Committee, as we mentioned at the outset, it issued subpoenas yesterday. When you are reporting on what they're doing, what is their intention?
Pardon me?
What are they trying to get at the heart of that might be different than what you're doing from your reporting?
Well, they probably have more information. We have different kinds of information, but they've been able to, being members of Congress and investigators, speak to sources and get documents that they haven't been able to get officially or voluntarily from the Department of Justice, ATF, and so on. And I think what they're looking to do is compare some of the material they have with what the Department of Justice turns over, which the subpoena asks for some very specific communications on certain dates, showing that the committee must have some information about things that occurred on those dates, and they want to see if the Department of Justice can fill in the blanks or will appropriately fill in the blanks.
So whether you're acting as a reporter or reporting to the American citizens or congressional investigators, what are the questions that you think need to be asked about this on behalf of the American public?
We still don't know, something like 10 months after this story broke, who thought of it. No one's been held responsible. No one has come forward to say, this was my idea, here's how it was implemented. I think 10 months later, somebody knows the answer to that question, and nobody's given it yet. Number two, one of the most important outstanding questions has to do with the murder of Border Patrol agent Brian Terry. That's how this whole story came to light. He was murdered along the border in December of last year, and we weren't going to know about it publicly, but an ATF whistleblower was the one who told Congress and the public that, hey, 2 of these weapons that had been followed in the Fast and Furious case were found on the scene of this murder. ATF wasn't going to report that publicly. That's the only reason we know about this whole story is because whistleblowers stepped forward. We still don't have answers about exactly what happened at that scene. There's a lot of mysteries about suspects that fled the scene, the possibility of more weapons than we know of having been found at the scene, what happened to them. There are a lot of discrepancies, and the family, who I communicate with, has received almost no answers 10 months later about the death of their son or their loved one.
The President was asked a question about this case at last Thursday's news conference. Let's listen to his response.
With respect to Solyndra and Fast and Furious, I think I've been very clear that I have complete confidence in Attorney General Holder in how he handles his office. He has been very aggressive in going after gun running and cash transactions that are going to these transnational drug cartels in Mexico. There's been a lot of cooperation between the United States and Mexico on this front. He's indicated that he was not aware of what was happening in Fast and Furious. Certainly I was not, and I think both he and I would have been very unhappy if somebody had suggested that guns were allowed to pass through that could have been prevented by the United States of America. He's assigned an Inspector General to look into how exactly this happened, and I have complete confidence in him, and I've got a complete confidence in the process to figure out who, in fact, was responsible for that decision and how it got made.
Any comments about the President's statement?
Well, in journalism sometimes we parse words maybe too much, but I noticed that whenever they talk about the Inspector General looking into this, it's a she, not a he, by the way, they never say investigation. The administration says look into it, find out about it, and we found out there was no piece of paper that changed hands when Attorney General Holder asked for this inquiry, or whatever you want to call it, of himself basically in his department. It was, we're told, a verbal comment that he made. We really don't know what the scope of this probe or inquiry is, and I just noticed that once again the President didn't call it an investigation. I don't know if that's significant or not, but they're avoiding use of that word.
I understand this question is speculative. Why would there be any hesitation on the part of the administration, especially the Justice Department, to just lay it all bare?
Well, one, we just don't know what we don't know. So I think that a lot of people always say it's best when something comes out that's controversial just to put all the facts out there. It's worse when this drip, drip, drip happens. But I guess I'm not the one to answer why they wouldn't just, back in January, February, have laid everything out on the table.
What's the government of Mexico saying about it?
The government of Mexico initially seemed very outraged by all of this. We communicated with some officials there. There were Congress people down there that even said the agents responsible for this program should be prosecuted because, in essence, they've, if the allegations were true, let guns come into a sovereign nation without the permission of the foreign country. I mean, imagine if Canada or Mexico were sending all kinds of assault rifles into the United States for their own secret private operation. We would be outraged. But some of that criticism has died down a little bit officially, and I'm not sure why. The government of Mexico is not overtly criticizing the United States the way they were in the beginning.
For Sharyl Attkisson, let's go to calls now. First one is from Lynn County, Michigan. This is Diane, who's a Democrat there. You're on the air, Diane. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, hi. There is something fishy regarding this because just sitting here thinking, being a woman, I have nothing against guns. The way they wanted to track, if they wanted to do something, they could introduce a low-grade isotope. These products are metal. That's one way to track them, and that would that would have led them to something. Now, that's not far-fetched, that's not science fiction, but they could have tracked it, and it's very easy. So that's all I have to say about it.
Well, with some exceptions, I mean, there were individual examples of agents who tracked the guns for a short period of time or would put battery-operated trackers of some sort on there. But in general, as you say, whether or not that could have been done, that was never the intention for a lot of these guns. They wanted them to go. They had no intention of tracking them along the way, and the idea was just to see where they ended up when they were recovered in Mexico.
Where did the name Fast and Furious come from?
I'm not sure. The agents tell me sometimes those are just sort of capricious, funny ways that they show up. There was a movie, I didn't see it, there's a movie called Fast and Furious. So I wonder if it had something to do with that. But we've run into other operations that are related or have allegations, similar allegations, and they're called things like Wide Receiver, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, Mad Dog. There's a lot of names like that. I'm not sure how they...
Short-term operations get names that agents refer to.
Well, someone told me that when it gets to be big enough, there are a lot of individual cases, but when a case gets to be big enough that they sometimes give it a code name like that.
Next question comes from Steve, an independent in Destin, Florida. Hi, Steve.
Good morning, ladies. How are you today?
Great, thanks.
Good.
Yes, it's either gross negligence or just ignorance, but when our top law enforcement official, doesn't know this is going on, we've got some serious issues. As much as I supported Barack in his last campaign, I never thought Mr. Holder was qualified, and, there's no whiff of any investigations of anybody on Wall Street. And I was just wondering if there's any link, do you think, between the timing of the release of this Iran deal, just all of a sudden, I think it happened a month and a half ago or 2 months ago, to try to do a diversionary tactic on, us citizens. And anyway, thank you so much, Ms. Attkisson. You're doing a wonderful job.
Thank you. Well, here's the reason why there is some suspicion about the timing, and I don't personally, I'm not saying I suspect the timing of these other DOJ things that have happened, Department of Justice things, but I've heard of that, and part of that is fueled by things like a memo went out very early on internal to ATF after CBS News had done our first report or two. And the memo directed agents across the country to try to find good opportunities to sort of divert from this issue. Any cases that they could make, publicly known so that it would get attention and basically, divert. So there is that discussion going on sometimes in government and law enforcement. We know this from that memo. As to whether these recent incidents or something like that, I have no idea.
The Washington Journal has linked to the CBS News page where all of Sharyl Attkisson's reporting is on all the stories you've been doing. Since when? What was your first story on this?
It was in, I believe, early February. We started looking into this late December, early January.
And can you tell us what first tipped you off?
Wow. My producer, Chris Scholl, received an anonymous letter that tipped us off that Senator Grassley was looking into this. And what little we knew of it looked kind of unbelievable, quite frankly. That's how a lot of stories start out. It's just hard to believe it would be true. And at the time, Senator Grassley's office did not want to help us for their own reasons. They were doing their own investigation. We couldn't get information from them. So I reached out on the blogs that were covering this, something called Cleanup ATF, I think, and a few insider blogs where these agents would communicate directly anonymously, I sort of reached out and started making contacts starting there. First with people I didn't know who they were and couldn't really report what they said, but it led me to people that I could later identify and verify.
And the latest story is this one. Attorney General Holder subpoenaed for documents in ATF gunwalker Fast and Furious case. A Vivian Shepherdson, who's watching us, tweets, so is ISA saying that Holder gave the order for this Fast and Furious operation? She asks.
I've not heard ISA say anything like that. I believe ISA's position, the last I heard, was either he knew something of it. I believe ISA thinks that Holder would have known about this. Or, in the alternative, I believe ISA maintains that Holder, as Attorney General, should have known that guns were being moved into a sovereign nation in a huge program like this.
And your estimate of the total number of guns that may have crossed the border?
In Fast and Furious alone, we know from agents that more than 2,000 guns were involved. And as I mentioned, we've identified a lot of other operations, including wide receiver dating back around 2006 that we're told about 450 weapons were involved. I think it's thousands and thousands.
Next call is from Modesto, California. Tony is a Republican. Good morning.
Thank you. Yes, but the program that was done under the Bush administration, those guns were under surveillance and they were followed going in. They always kept track of them. And, one of the things, that we seem to have just over and over and over out of this administration, no matter what it is, everything's got to be hidden. Whether it's a loan deal, whether it has something to do with the police, with the Fast and Furious. These people's son, he's dead. And somebody needs to get up there and answer right now. And if Holder needs to go to jail, then we need to throw him in jail. It's that simple. But you know that he was responsible for this stuff, and he needs to take responsibility for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just modify one thing that you said. I've read a lot of people saying that during the programs that started under the Bush administration, the guns were all tracked. That's not the case, according to agents that work directly on some of these cases. In some instances, they were tracked or partially tracked, but in many instances, we are told that they were not.
This question came across Twitter. It's from James Ard, and he writes, please ask her who yelled at her and why did they whine about the Post and Times not asking these kinds of questions. This tweet refers to an interview or conversation that you had with Laura Ingraham on a radio program. We have a little clip of that, and then we'll have you come back and give us a little more context. Let's listen.
So they were literally screaming at you?
Yes. Well, the DOJ woman was just yelling at me. A guy from the White House on Friday night literally screamed at me.
Who was the person? Who was the person at Justice screaming?
Eric Schultz. The person screaming was Tracy Schmaler. She was yelling, not screaming. And the person who screamed at me was Eric Schultz at the White House.
What do you want people to know about this exchange?
Well, the exchange was reported accurately. All I really want to say about that is when you ask questions on controversial stories, as I often do, people don't like it. They don't like me when I ask them many times. And I always think it's interesting to see their reactions. Many people, public affairs people that deal with people that you're reporting on, maintain a certain composure or even friendliness sometimes. Sometimes they don't. But when things reach a certain fevered pitch response, I feel like it tells you a little bit something about the questions you asked and where the story may be going.
Were you surprised that this story about the White House yelling at you made it all over the conservative blogosphere?
Yeah, I had no idea that people would think that was so interesting.
When there are questions about your own politics based on your reporting, how do you respond?
I get said, both sides say things about me depending on the story I do. For example, when I did a story on Republican Representative Stephen Booyer, whom many credit with having weighing in on his decision to resign. It was about a charity of his that had some mystery surrounding it. I was accused of sort of banging up on the Republicans. And when I do stories that lead to perhaps Democrats' accountability, then I'm accused the other way. I'm kind of used to it. It goes with the territory. It doesn't bother me, and I read about myself on both sides occasionally, and it doesn't bother me. When
you're involved in a story such as this with Mexican drug cartels, even with you think about the story this week about their possible involvement in the Iran assassination that's alleged, do you worry about your own safety?
I do. When I work on stories that kind of go that deep and get into sort of mysterious things, and you speak with confidential informants, and it leads to this sort of stuff, you do get a little creeped out sometimes, but I get over that. You know, the story ends and I look back and think, well, that was kind of silly to be worried about.
Baltimore. Crystal, Democrat there. Good morning, Crystal.
Yes, I just had a question about the notifications that Holder sent to ISA. Wasn't he sent the same information at the same time that Holder got it? And isn't ISA being investigated himself by the Ethics Committee with regards to some involvements that he had with one of the big banks that was involved with the big meltdown that we had?
I am not reporting on those issues. Do you know if ICE is being investigated by any?
I don't know, but I can check actually before we finish.
And there is an allegation, the Democrats have said or suggested that if they should have known about this, or if they should have known that Fast and Furious was a so-called gun-walking operation, they say that Congressman Issa should have known as well, because he received some sort of briefing many months ago on Fast and Furious generally. Issa has said flatly that that's false. So that's where you have it, one side against the other.
One of the sets of materials that you've posted on the CBS site on your reporting on this are a series of memos that came from the Justice Department with large black areas. What are these, and what are people to take away from what they're seeing?
Well, the Justice Department and White House have turned over some materials with a lot of redactions. And what you do have to wonder, in the latest Justice Department materials, which show briefing memos went to Attorney General Eric Holder, what is it left that they would still need to black out? Is this something that involves yet more that we don't know? I mean, as I said before, you don't know what you don't know, but there sure are a lot of redactions and a lot of documents that haven't been turned over.
Next is a call from Tucson. Good morning to Peter. You're on the air.
Oh, yeah. I can't help but think that both Eric Holder and maybe even the president knew about this, considering what their gun records, they really don't like people with guns. And, I think when it comes down to it, they both probably knew about it and, kind of smiled and said, yeah, it might be a good idea. This way we can go ahead and, confirm what we've been saying about all the guns in Mexico have been coming from the United States.
There is that thought that it was part of a political decision. There's been no evidence of that in documents that I've seen, but that's certainly part of the discussion, that the idea, if a lot of guns in Mexico were traced back to the United States, this would advance the goals of the agenda of people who would like more gun control laws.
You mentioned the federal agent Brian Terry. Can you tell us a little bit more about his story?
Brian was I believe, a decorated Marine before he became part of this special tactical team with the Border Patrol. And pretty amazing guy, having learned about him in the last few months from his family, who was down there, ironically, on the border for the special team, not to prevent illegal immigrants from coming in, but instead to protect the illegal immigrants who are coming in from the illegal bandits who prey upon them. So he wasn't even there manning the border per se to stop people. He was manning the border to protect the illegal immigrants from other worse illegal immigrants, and lost his life, as a member of that team on a night when a group came upon him and some shots were fired, and he was the only one killed on the scene. There was a lot of chaos, and there are questions surrounding the number of suspects who were there, who was taken into custody, what weapons were found at the scene. And again, 10 months later, to not know the basic answers to what evidence was there and what it found, I think is unusual.
We have about 4 minutes left. The information on the viewer that referred to Darrell Issa investigation. Here's some detail. In September 2011, a group called American Family Voices filed an ethics complaint with the Office of Congressional Ethics against Congressman Issa, alleging that he has repeatedly used his public office for personal financial gain. The group claimed that Issa used his position with House Oversight and Government Reform to intervene in dealings with Goldman Sachs, Merrill Lynch, and others. Darrell Issa's office rejected the allegations, and the Office of Congressional Ethics has not responded publicly to the complaint. So there's some additional information. Tennessee Colony, Texas. Interesting name for a community. Our viewer there is Sean, an independent. You're on the air.
Yes, ma'am. I would like to ask your guest, maybe she thought we should register all our guns.
Do I think that? I don't have an opinion on that, and before I covered this story, quite frankly, I had not covered gun stories, gun control stories, and I'm not terribly familiar with the issues and the controversies on that.
How are the guns that were used in this operation tracked?
Well, by and large, they weren't. I mean, the serial numbers were written down, so when the law enforcement would allegedly encourage the gun dealers to go ahead and sell to a questionable character, they would write down the serial numbers and enter them into a suspect database. So they weren't tracked in real time, but they could be tracked backwards upon their recovery in Mexico. If the Mexicans ran the tracing through our system, which they often do, then we could say, hey, that came back to the Fast and Furious case. And in Fast and Furious, very quickly, very early on, those guns were showing up in Mexico at violent crime scenes, and they had confirmation of this and a lot of documentation of it in the very first weeks.
Who would you most like to talk to as you continue your reporting on this?
Well, I would love to sit down and do an interview with the Attorney General, which I've asked for. I think that'd be a good, wide-ranging interview where he could answer a lot of questions and maybe put a lot of things to rest and give his side of the story. I think he'd be the key go-to person right now.
Phoenix is up next. This is Ken, a Democrat there. Good morning. Ken, turn down your TV volume, and what's your question?
My question is actually, what would be a possibility if there could be some type of swap for weapons, for these weapons that were turned in, that were walked across the border? And in other words, information leading to where the weapons actually did end up, and if they were walked back by offering rewards to the walkers.
Well, it's my understanding that once they were walked across the border, they sort of fanned out and went all over the place to cartels. The cartel members would not necessarily know we got a walked gun from the Fast and Furious operation, nor would they have a serial number list to compare them to. They are all over the place, and really until the gun is checked after it's been used or recovered and it matches up in the tracing system, I believe that's the only way to know where those have gone. I don't think you can really work backwards and tell people to all check their serial numbers and swap them back. I don't think that would be practical.
We're just about out of time. I'll put this tweet on the air from Kay Wright, who writes, Mexican cartel sprayed casino and killed over 50 women. Notice we don't have international news. We're being kept in the dark. As we close here, now that these subpoenas have been issued, what does the committee tell you their intent is, and what's the timetable?
I think the timetable is sort of as soon as possible. I didn't see a date on the subpoena, but I need to look at it more carefully. I was rushed yesterday, and I didn't see a due date. I do know more hearings are planned, so I think they'd like to have some answers and documents before some late October hearings. Their goal being, once again, to try to compare what they get with what they a little bit of what they already know, and see if they can fill in some blanks and holes as to, again, who made these decisions and who all knew about it how high up.
The story is called Fast and Furious, and we'll look for more reporting from our guests on CBS News and certainly more discussion from the congressional committees. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.